We've got two debate participants. We have Patrick Collins from the UK. He's taking the position that Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty of the assassination of JFK. And Johnny Cairns, who maintains that Lee Harvey Oswald is innocent of the charge of killing JFK. So we've restricted the discussion to certain particular parts of evidence. One is the rifle itself, the Carcano, CE 399, the ammunition, the shells, palm print on the rifle, the paper bag in which supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald used for the Carcano to be carried to the schoolbook depository, and also Howard Brennan's witnessing of Lee Harvey Oswald. I wanted to give you then 10 minutes each of uninterrupted time to present your cases, and followed by rebuttals. Okay.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's great. Who would you like to go first?
Okay. Any Johnny, you have any preference?
No, I'll allow Patrick to go first, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect. That makes perfect.
Gentlemen, so Patrick, why don't you start, and I will start to count your 10 minutes now.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, Johnny. Good morning, Bill. Yeah, so I mean, I started looking at the JFK assassination several decades ago, and over an elapsed time of 30 years, I've studied it quite deeply in fits and starts. And today, I'll just simply put a basic case forwards for showing why I believe that Oswald was guilty beyond reasonable doubt of shooting John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, November the 22nd, 1963. And we're talking about some of the material evidence. We're not talking about eyewitnesses other than Howard Brennan. Howard Brennan was a man who was standing opposite the book depository on the corner of Houston and Elm Street, and from a distance of approximately 25 yards, saw a young man standing in the window about 10 to 15 minutes before the parade arrived. He thought the man was young, pleasant looking, average sort of height, maybe slightly slight, short hair. And he was standing in the window, gazing out to, looking out to space. We don't know for sure whether the man who is the alleged assassin was standing or kneeling. I suspect he was probably standing at that stage. When the motorcade came by, and the man had been in the window for a couple of minutes, and Brennan varies a little bit in his book on what he says. He says he appeared at the window, then he disappeared, then he came back about 30 seconds later. What I would say is that I think we can firmly establish beyond reasonable doubt is that the man was a young white male, and he was approximately 30 years of age, according to Brennan. Oswald was, of course, 24 years old. After the turn of the limousine from Houston onto Elm Street, according to the majority of witnesses, there was a loud bang, loud sound just after the turn. There's a little girl called Rosemary Willis who's visible in the Zapruder film. She's running by the side of the limo, and she stops around about frame 165, 160. There's a famous photograph of Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy and John Connolly. John Connolly and Mrs. Kennedy are looking towards the camera. The man who took the photograph was a guy called Croft, who was training to be a missionary. It's very clear on Connolly's face and Jackie's face that they are perplexed or concerned at something. So we think that there's a shot fired, which Brennan said made him look up. When he looks up, he sees that same man that he saw 10, 15 minutes earlier in the window firing, sees him fire twice, sees him taking his time, apparently in no rush. Another little kid is an African-American kid called Amos Ewins, also sees a man fire. He doesn't think that the man, initially he doesn't think that the man was a white man. He actually thinks he was a black man. No one else really gets a good look apart from about 12:15. A young guy called Arnold Rowland, who's looking up at the 6th floor of the book depository building, and he sees a young white man with a rifle across his chest. Now, he actually thought it was down on the southwest corner window. Brennan's looking at the southeast corner window. It's possible that the man appeared first in the southwest window and then in the southeast window, or it's possible Arnold Rowland was mistaken. So I think the case is that Howard Brennan sees a young white man. In his book, he says he was sure it was Lee Harvey Oswald. When he's asked to identify Oswald at the police department that day, in his book, he says he's too frightened to identify him, so he can't make a positive ID. Of course, you know, there are lots of court cases where people are told that they have to be 100% certain to make an ID, and he wasn't 100% certain at the time. He was scared out of his wits, no doubt. So I think a very good case, and I'm sorry, you know, we don't have very much time to go into this, can be made that Oswald was the man that Howard Brennan saw. But I would also put in the caveat, Brennan is not necessary to convict Oswald to show that he was guilty beyond reasonable doubt. He's not necessary at all. Material evidence puts Oswald in the window at that time. Brennan is just, you know, an additional aspect to it all. The rifle. The Mannlicher Carcano is an Italian World War II rifle, which there was lots of them hanging around in the 1960s. It was surplus World War II firearms, and Oswald had cut out an order form from American Rifle magazine. I think it was February 1963, and he'd ordered a Carcano from Klein Sporting Goods of Chicago. The rifle was mail order. It was about $12. It was mounted with a $9 scope or thereabouts. It was picked up from Lee Harvey Oswald's post office box in Dallas, Texas in March, and I believe that he ordered that rifle for the purposes of shooting General Walker in Dallas, who was a retired general in the army. Not to kill John F. Kennedy. I don't think Oswald had the idea of killing JFK until Wednesday, the 20th of November that week, but that's a digression. In general terms, this was one of the things that I was slightly perplexed by, given the chain of possession of evidence, so to speak, is that by law, on none of the items that we're talking about, the rifle, the bullets, the shell, the whole bullet, the stretcher bullet, they don't require signing or marking. They don't require an ID number. All they need is a police officer, FBI agent, Secret Service agent, to testify in court that the material was given to them at some point, who they got it from, and who it was passed on to. Now, the rifle was found, let's say for the sake of argument, within an hour of the assassination behind two boxes. And it's stashed away back in the back corner towards the elevators, which is straight down that back wall and a little bit in. And it was found and filmed by a guy called Tom Alia, and he filmed the rifle. And it can be seen that I think most people would agree, some don't, that it was the same rifle that was seen in the backyard photographs that Oswald had Marina take of him with his handgun and some militant magazines earlier that year. The rifle was identified as being shipped from Klein's in Chicago. There was a print lifted off the stock, which is the wooden stock of the barrel. And a lift, by the way, is when a sheet of sort of like a tacky, sticky paper is placed onto the barrel and lifted. So the print effectively disappears. That print was lifted by Carl Day, Lieutenant Carl Day of the Dallas. Yeah, and the print was identified as being Oswald's print subsequently by FBI print experts. Now, the print doesn't really prove anything if it was Oswald's weapon. I mean, he could have taken it into work that day to give it to somebody else or to sell it, and he was tricked. But it's indicative that he'd handled it. You can't really tell how old a handprint is. There was a partial print of Oswald's allegedly, or I would say not beyond any doubt, by the trigger guard, which is indicative that he'd handled it, that it was his anyway. Most importantly, I think the Carcano was the only rifle found that day on the 6th floor. I met some of the DPD who handled it and who saw it and identified it, said made in Italy on it. There was one policeman, Sheriff's Department, Roger Craig, who decided about a decade later to declare that it was a Mauser, which is a German rifle, and it said, Mauser stamped on the side. Everyone else pretty much, saw the Made in Italy stamp. I don't think there can be no reasonable doubt that the rifle that was found on the 6th floor was the Italian Carcano. The question is who fired it. So if we then look at the bullets that were found.
You have 1 minute, Patrick.
We have a bullet was found on the stretcher in hospital where either one that Connolly had been laid in or one next to it, and it was proven to be fired by Oswald's Carcano to the exclusion of all other weapons. The two pieces, the head and the tail of the bullet, which supposedly hit Kennedy in the head and killed him, were also Mannlicher Carcano 6.5mm material, and probably to a degree of about 98% certainty, those two pieces of bullet in the nose and the base, which were found in the front footwell, came from one bullet. I think that covers everything other than the 3 shells found by the window and the sniper's nest. 3 empty shells, 2 grouped together, one off to one side, may have been found in that precise position or might have been slightly moved. Those shells were fired by Oswald's Carcano.
Okay, Patrick, I have to interrupt. Your time is up. I gave you a little bit extra time because of the interruption. So, all right.
Yeah.
Johnny, do you want to then start now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. Good afternoon, Patrick.
A pleasure.
Yeah, so kind of where to begin with the whole physical evidence of the John F. Kennedy case? Well, I think the best place to start is the rifle itself. There's serious problems with the rifle. The chain of possession for the rifle prior to the murder of the president, and the condition of the rifle itself. Now, prior to the murder of the president, the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Oswald had mail ordered the rifle to his post office box in Dallas, Texas. There is a problem with that, and that is there is really no evidence that Lee Oswald ordered and picked up this rifle at his post office box. Now, there was a man by the name of Stuart Galliner who contacted the post office regulations, the post office, sorry, and he asked the post office what regulations were in place during March 1963, because remember, the rifle was ordered in the name of Hadel. It was not ordered in the name of Lee Oswald. Now, the commission had a problem with this, so they basically got Harry Holmes, who was a postmaster, I think it was, and he testified that basically there's a part of a form, an application form, and part 3 would basically have information other people that could use this box. Now, this is where Oswald would have put Hadel if he permitted such a person to use the box. Problem is, the part is missing. Now, Harry Holmes testified that it was standard procedure that the post office would rip, that once the box was closed, that the post office would basically take this part out, part 3, and destroy it and throw it away. Well, that was in stark contrast to what Mr. Galliner was told by a man by the name of Ralph Rea. And this is in a letter, you can look at this letter. It says basically there's 2 sections pertaining to this. Section 846-53H of the Postal Manual provides that the third portion of box rental applications identifying persons other than the applicant authorized to receive mail must be retained for 2 years after the box is closed. And section 355-111B prescribes that the mail addressed to a person at a post office box who is not authorized to receive mail shall be endorsed addressee unknown and returned to sender where possible. Now, we can't confirm or deny whether Oswald got this rifle at his post office box because this documentation has been destroyed. But this is this documentation, part 3 of the form, it should have been kept because it's right there in the post office regulations. So why has it been destroyed? There's never been a credible answer for that. And in fact, Harry Holmes, if he had testified the way he did in a court of law, he would have been impeached by the postal regulations. He never brought the postal regulations with him when he testified before the Warren Commission. So there is a very serious question whether Lee Oswald actually picked up the rifle at his mailbox. Now, also, when the money order was placed for the rifle, it was placed, I think it was March 12th, 1963, and it was at 10:30 a.m. in the morning. We know this because it was stamped. It was postmarked that time. Now, the problem with this is, on March 12th, 1963, at 10:30 a.m., Lee Harvey Oswald is accounted for at his work. And that is according to Commission Exhibit 1855. Now, it shows that he was at his work, was at Jagger's Child Stovall from 8 till 5:15 p.m. And he took a lunch break from 12:15 till 12:45 p.m. So he only got a 30-minute lunch break in that time. On his time card, it basically goes by the job he was doing. So from 8 till 9 o'clock, he might have been doing one job. From 9 till 10, he could have been doing another. And this was all individually marked on his time card and it was signed off. There is no record that he ever left his job to go and place his money order for this rifle. And if he did, who completed the jobs that was signed off in his name that day? So this is further evidence that Lee Oswald was being framed for something with regards to these weapons arriving at his mailbox. Now, regarding the rifle itself, let's look at a very important part of this question. What condition was the rifle found on the 6th floor in? Okay, now let's look at the testimony of Simmons. We could read that, but I've not got enough time to do it, unfortunately. And there's obviously the testimony of Fraser. But the scope on the weapon was defective. It could not provide an accurate acquiring of the target. The weapon actually had to be modified by the use of a metal shims for test firing purposes. The bolt on the rifle was difficult to operate. I think Mr. Staley commented on the particular effort it actually required to work the bolt. And the master rifleman who test fired the Mannlicher did not want to pull the trigger of the gun for fear of breaking the firing pin. And they also found that the trigger pull was a 2-stage operation. The marksman's aim, when they basically pulled the bolt, it threw their aim off considerably, and they would obviously have to try and reacquire the target. Now, what makes this a problem is that the FBI tested the weapon, and they found it took a minimum of 2.3 seconds to work the bolt. Now, this becomes even more apparent when we look at what Mr. Lee Bowers, who was just one of the many witnesses in Dealey Plaza, what he told Mark Lane regarding the sequence of the shots. Now, Mark Lane asked Mr. Bowers, how many shots did you hear? Lee Bowers says there were 3 shots and they were spaced with 1 shot, a pause, and 2 shots in very close order, such as and Mr. Bowers simulates the shots with knocks. He goes, knock, 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 almost on top of each other, while there was some pause between the first and the second shot. Now, what Lee Bowers is saying is that shot 2 and shot 3 came almost simultaneously. And that obviously proves that the Mannlicher couldn't have been the only weapon that was used that day, or even if it was used at all. Now, another problem with the Commission's case is Commission Exhibit 3 CE 399. Now, this is the bullet that was found at Parkland Hospital. Now, the critics of the report have dubbed this the magic bullet, because they, of course, disagree with what this bullet is supposed to have done. But in a legal sense, the bullet provides all sorts of problems as well. In a court of law, each witness who took possession of the bullet would be asked to testify. Now, they would be asked if they could identify the bullet that was getting presented as evidence. Now, the man who found the bullet was a man by the name of Darrell Tomlinson. Now, Mr. Tomlinson, when he found this bullet on a stretcher at Parkland, he passed this bullet to his supervisor, who was Mr. O.P. Wright. Wright inspected the bullet and passed it over to Richard Johnson as a Secret Service agent. Johnson then gave the bullet to Chief Rowley when he got back to Washington. And then
Excuse me, yeah, 1 minute, Johnny.
All right, okay. Chief Rowley then gave the bullet to Elmer Lee Todd. The problem is with CE 399, Tomlinson, Wright, Johnson, and Rowley said that that bullet was not the bullet they had in their possession that day. Now, Elmer Lee Todd was shown the bullet, and he apparently could identify CE 399 due to his marking on the bullet. Well, there was a man by the name of John Hunt who went to the National Archives, and he inspected the whole bullet, and he found there was only 3 markings on this bullet, and not one of them was Elmer Lee Todd's. They all comprised of the various FBI lab technicians, Cortland Cunningham, Robert Fraser, and the other guy, I forgot his name. But Tomlinson's mark, Elmer Lee Todd's mark is not on that bullet. Obviously, in a legal sense, this completely destroys the commission, the foundation of which the commission's case is built upon. I've run out of obviously time. I mean,
Excuse me, Johnny, your time is up.
Yeah.
Now let's have rebuttals. Patrick, why don't you make rebuttals to what Johnny said, or
Yeah,
then
sure.
Johnny can rebut. Of course.
Okay, well, first of all, you've obviously done your homework regarding the PO box, and I would agree that if you'd established that Oswald was at work, and we know when the Carcano was connected, that you make a point that suggests that somebody else collected it. I don't think we can be 100% certain that Oswald collected the rifle was collected at as well. I'll just start off by talking about Lee Bowers, who is quite an important witness. So Johnny, you stated that the pattern that he described, bang, space, bang, bang, proves that was the pattern. It doesn't prove that at all. That's one person's opinion. There were far more people who thought the shots were evenly spaced, and I can vouch for that personally, because I met about 25 of them in the early 1980s. Now, you could rebut that and say, well, is their opinion any more valid? But you can't say that ear witness testimony proves anything other than that there were a number of shots, and we know from the Zapruder film that the shots were almost certainly fired within about a 10-second period, probably most likely 8 to 9 seconds, and we don't know the spacing of the shots other than we know that the back shot struck by frame 223, 24, and the headshot struck 313, 5 frames later. So we know that 2 shots were fired 5 seconds apart. We can be pretty sure that there was an early missed shot by the reactions of certain important witnesses. Connolly was one of them. Tina Towner was another. There were other people, without going into detail, who said they were pretty clear that there was a shot shortly after the turn. So we have an 8 to 9 second time span. This does not present a problem with the Carcano's recycling time. And to correct you, you can aim and fire the rifle in 2.3 seconds. Just to cycle it takes about 1.4 seconds. It's good shooting, no doubt about it, but no one should be making any claims that, that we have proof that Oswald's Carcano couldn't have been the rifle that was used as the murder weapon. And more to the point, all the ballistics material that was recovered has proven beyond any doubt that those bullets were fired from Oswald's Carcano. So what you would need to present to defend your position is that the ballistics materials were swapped out and that other bullets were used. Now, that's extremely far-fetched, and that's right at the end. That's pretty way out there in terms of conspiracy theory. Now, to address the scope, Johnny, most people who are familiar with weapons don't think that Oswald would have used the scope. People who use the Carcano, we've got quite a few of those guys on some of our Facebook forums, are adamant that over 62 to 88 yards, Oswald would have used the iron sights. And it's possible he used the scope for the first shot, realized it was out, and reverted to using the iron sights, as is covered very nicely in that documentary, the JFK, The Lost Bullet. So I don't think you've shown, by quoting Bowers, you've not shown anything. There are 263 people on record stating information and opinion about the shots, and well over half of them, in fact probably closer to 2/3, thought the shots were about evenly spaced and lasted between 7 and 10 seconds. Yeah, there were some people who thought it was bang, 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 but you know, there are lots of echoes going on in Dealey Plaza. I mean, I lived in Dallas for a year, and I've been down there over 100 times. So you can't rely on Bowers. He doesn't prove anything. As far as the magic bullet goes, the Stretcher bullet, Johnny, it doesn't matter whether or not the bullet was marked or not, or if a person who picked it up and thought they'd marked it didn't mark it. It doesn't make it inadmissible. It's up for the judge to direct the jury based upon the.
Okay, Patrick, excuse me, I have to jump in. Your 3 minutes are up. Johnny, why don't you jump in and give your rebuttal of what Patrick's been saying?
I would just like to say that I'm not here to debate the Zapruder film. In fact, there's been a lot of good, extensive work done on the Zapruder film that contests what Patrick was saying. As for Mr. Bowers was not the only witness to say that the shot 2 and 3 came right on top of each other. In fact, I actually watched a video there recently, and I can send the link to you, Bill. And it's 4 ex-Secret Service agents are in Dealey Plaza, and one of them is Clint Hill. And one of the Secret Service agents who was there that day describes the pattern of the shots, and he describes bang, bang, bang. So there is a lot of other witnesses that do describe the sequence of the shots that way. Touching upon something that Patrick just said there regarding the rifle in itself and the operation of the rifle. I'm just going to read out I'll probably run out of time. I'm just going to read out the testimony of Simmons. Basically, what I was going to say is that regarding the Zapruder film, I'm not here to debate the Zapruder film. There's been a lot of good work done on the Zapruder film, which obviously contests what Patrick was saying. And there is other witnesses to the sequence of the shots to back up what Mr. Bowers was saying. I mean, I've just watched a video on YouTube, I think it was yesterday or the day before, uploaded by Vince Palomara, and there was 4 ex-Secret Service agents who were there that day, and one of them is describing the sequence of the shots, and it's bang, bang, bang. And of course, there is other witnesses. I just can't cite them all because I've got time restraints. Yeah, so basically with regards to something Patrick said there, he said that basically you could aim, reload and aim at the same time. Well, that's not what it was testified to by Mr. Simmons of the US Army. And this is right here in the Warren Commission testimony. Yes, there were several comments made, particularly with respect to the amount of effort required to open the bolt. As a matter of fact, Mr. Staley had difficulty in opening the bolt in his first firing exercise. He thought it was completely up, and it was not, and he had to retrace his steps as he attempted to open the bolt after the first round. And he also said, in our experiments, the pressure to open the bolt was so great that we tended to move the rifle off target. So that is in contradiction to what Patrick just said there. Now, there was other things that I did obviously want to touch upon, the chain of possession for Commission Exhibit 399. Well, yeah, there is established chains of evidence, established rules regarding the preservation of evidence, and one of them is marking evidence. I mean, how are you supposed to present evidence in a court of law and ask an officer of the police to identify the bullet as the one he had that day if there is no markings on the bullet? It could be any number of bullets. So no, the preservation of the chain of possession is absolutely critical to presenting evidence in a court of law. Now, as I say, Commission Exhibit 399, you have O.P. Wright that couldn't identify the bullet. In fact, Josiah Thompson went to Parkland Hospital in 1966 and showed Wright a picture of CE 399, and he rejected CE 399 as the bullet that he got from Tomlinson that day. Tomlinson rejected the bullet. Secret Service agent Richard Johnson rejected the bullet. Chief Rowley rejected the bullet. Elmer Lee Todd, who could identify the bullet solely on his markings do not reside.
Pardon me, Johnny. Yeah, your time is up, Johnny. Patrick, why don't you continue, please? Your rebuttal.
Yeah, it's not necessary for any piece of evidence to be marked. I checked with a judge. I also checked with a retired law enforcement officer, and they're both in America, by the way, and I checked with a lawyer here. It's something that's nice to have, but it's not necessary. As far as you saying that, going back to Bowers and other people, yeah, sure. About 25% of the people who were there, ear witnesses, thought the last two shots were closer together, and some of those thought they were right on top of each other. But it doesn't prove anything, because the majority of people said they were evenly spaced. So you're not really going anywhere with that. Now, you talked about, I'm sorry, I've run out of paper, so I couldn't really make notes, so I'd be going off from memory. That the fact that whether or not the Warren Commission established how fast the rifle could be fired, in a sense, doesn't matter, because there are plenty of people in the years gone by in the House Select Committee used Carcanos. You can fire that. There's one guy who can fire it 7 times in 7 seconds and get 7 bullseyes at 250 yards. So, yeah, sure, he was a much better shot than Oswald or whoever. But the most important thing, Johnny, is that the evidence by 4 investigations concludes that the Carcano was the murder weapon. So whether or not you think it could be fired in the time that you want it to be fired in is pretty much inconsequential. To remove the Carcano from the story is extreme conspiracy theory along the lines of the Roswell incident. I mean, it's really kooky. Sorry to be blunt. That I've handled that rifle. I spent a whole day in the archives with Marion Johnson. These are honourable men who serve their country, and we talked about all these items of evidence. They are proven to be the materials that came from Dallas. Sure, Tomlinson and Wright, when showed a picture of a bullet, said, "Well, I can't be certain that that was the bullet I saw." People don't have photographic memories for bullets, Johnny. That bullet was not introduced into the evidence chain because it wasn't fired that day. It was found on a hospital stretcher, and all you need to do is get those people into court and say, yeah, I picked up a bullet, and the bullet that you've given me, I don't remember it looking like that, but I definitely picked up a bullet. There was a bullet that went through Kennedy and Connolly. We know that, and people argue that the single bullet theory it doesn't hold water. Of course it does. The question is, was it another bullet? Was it not? Was it 399 or not? A bullet went through both of those men, because there was only one bullet in the evidence to account for both of those sets of wounds. So I think you're doing what I call bubble think. You're itemizing very precise aspects of the case, and you're separating them out. You're not, therefore, really putting forward the bigger, wider picture. And yes, the devil can be in the detail, but you're not seeing the wood for the trees. Now, you've limited this discussion to the specific items that you want to talk about because you think that's core to establishing that Oswald wasn't the shooter. There are over 100 points of evidence that establish beyond reasonable doubt that Oswald was the shooter, whether you like it or not. And to exclude those, I know we're limited on time, to exclude those serves no real great purpose in terms of understanding the historical truth.
Okay, Johnny, you respond in 3 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Just to touch upon CE399 there for a second. Not only did Wright reject CE399, but he pulled out a slug that a bullet that Thompson and Wright were using for their reenactment purposes. It was a .30 caliber bullet, and it had a pointed tip. And you can look at this in Thompson's book. And Wright says that's what the bullet looked like. He denied CE399 was the bullet that he got in his possession that day. Now, Patrick can say that, oh, this isn't important because it was a bullet. Well, unfortunately, when Mr. Wright, who was not called before the commission, took the stand at the trial of Lee Oswald and swore under oath that that bullet that the prosecution was presenting as having gone through two men and found in a stretcher at Parkland Hospital was not the bullet he had in his possession that day. Then the validity of the commission's case, or the prosecution's case, sorry, starts crumbling all around. Now, of course,
did you say OP Wright? Did you say OP Wright? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. OP
Yeah,
Wright.
he's the personnel security guy at the hospital, isn't he? Just for listeners to know. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was also a retired Dallas police officer, so he knew about firearms. Also, when we talk about the rifle itself, I mean, or Oswald's performance with a rifle, should I say? I mean, it's quite striking to me that the commission never bothered calling anyone who actually witnessed Oswald with a rifle to testify. In fact, no, they did. They called Nelson Delgado to testify. And he said that Oswald's proficiency with a rifle was a big joke. He said it was laughable. And in fact, if we look at what some of his ex-Marine colleagues actually said, and this was a man by the name of Sherman Cooley. He was an expert hunter. He was a fellow Marine of Lee Harvey Oswald's. And this is what Cooley said regarding on his opinion as to whether Oswald was an excellent, good, or poor shot. He said, if I had to pick one man in the whole United States to shoot me, I'd pick Oswald. I saw the man shoot. There's no way he could ever have learned to shoot well enough to do what they accused him of. Take me, I'm one of the best shots around, and I couldn't have done it. James R. Pearson was another Marine Corps colleague of Lee Oswald, stated Oswald possessed a lack of coordination that contributed to his being very poor in rifle marksmanship. Now, contrary to obviously what Patrick tries to convey, that somebody apparently fired in 7 seconds, the Mannlicher Carcano, and hit 7 bullseyes. Who was this man? Can you present his name so we can actually check out?
Yeah, he's on,
okay. Yeah, let me just jump in. Okay,
he's on YouTube. Let me finish.
1 second,
he's on YouTube.
Yeah,
he's
John,
on YouTube.
Johnny, Patrick, 1 second. Yeah, I gave Johnny a little bit more time because there was an interruption from Patrick. Gentlemen, why don't we just go at it as a conversation? Go ahead, just jump in and go for it.
There are plenty of people who can fire a Carcano in working condition very quickly, and he's easily found on YouTube. I don't know his name. I've discussed it for the past decade with people on the forums. He gets 7 shots in 7 seconds. I mean, I fired a Carcano at age 23, having never fired a weapon before in my life. I got 3 hits in 7 seconds at 65, 75, and 85 yards with 5 minutes practice. Oswald was a Marine. He was a sharpshooter and a marksman. His brother, who knew him rather well, went hunting with him. And people in Texas tend to know their guns. Said Oswald was an excellent shot. He had very steady forearms, very strong, and was very good at rapid fire. And that's his brother talking. sure, you can find people who were in the Marines with Oswald who said he wasn't a good shot, but you don't have to be an expert in the Marines to pull off that shooting, Johnny. That was good shooting. It wasn't undoable. You know, most people who are familiar with weapons and who've used that rifle will say it could be, you know, it could be done, including Mike Yardley, you know, the expert. So, and there are other people who were knew Oswald in the Marines who said actually he was an okay shot. So you've got to be careful. You're just cherry picking.
Can I just jump in? Can I just jump
in?
in?
Yeah, sure. I've finished.
Okay. Well, basically, you say that Oswald was a good and even excellent shot. I mean, this has been debunked quite a bit. And all you need to do, Patrick, please just let me finish. All you've got to do is look at his Marine Corps record. Now, on his last shooting score, okay, he got a 191, which is 1 point over the minimum to qualify as a marksman. And a marksman, according to Anderson, was it Anderson? According to Anderson, he said that it would classify him as a rather poor shot. Now, you have got witness after witness who witnessed Oswald firing in the Marines who would tell you that he was a poor shot. Now, this bothered Wesley Liebler of the Commission, because this is what he put in his famous Liebler memorandum. He said, the fact that most of the experts were much more proficient with a rifle than Oswald could ever be expected to be, and the record indicates that fact. To put it bluntly, that sort of selection from the record could seriously affect the integrity and credibility of the entire report. So what people who claim Oswald was guilty do with his shooting record is seriously worrying. And it goes to show the lengths that they will go to try and proclaim that this man was guilty.
I don't think it's seriously worrying at all. To fire 3 shots over about 8 to 9 seconds was within the capabilities of a Marine, even if he was the worst shot in his regiment. It's still doable, as Mike Yardley, the rifle expert who's done most of the Discovery and History channels, say, well, you know, citing all these people that said that Oswald was right at the bottom of the pack. It doesn't matter. You know, you and I, with a bit of practice, could get 3 shots off to a moving target in 9 seconds, Johnny. Don't delude yourself. Have you ever been up there? Have you been up to the 6th floor?
Yes, I have been there. I have been there, and it wasn't.
It's not difficult, is it?
But you keep on moving the time back to, you said it was 8 seconds, then it was 9 seconds. Now there has been extensive work done. And
we don't know.
By people that have studied the Zapruder film and that say the shooting was in 6 seconds. Now you're basing your 8-second thesis on the Zapruder film when you can't see President Kennedy. You say that he was shot as he was going behind the sign. We don't know that because you can't see him. So, well,
to say what you to say that what you've said is that the Zapruder film tells us that 3 shots were fired in 6 seconds is absolute nonsense. There's no way you can tell that because there's no sound. All you know from the Zapruder film is that Kennedy was shot in the back and in the head approximately 5 seconds apart. That's all it tells you, right? You don't know the last shot could have been fired 3 seconds after the headshot. Sorry, the missed shot. It could have been fired before Zapruder started refilming. It could have been fired at Z155, Z160, Z165. We don't know. So what you've just said is actually positively misrepresenting what you can determine from the film.
Well, the commission concluded the first shot missed. And I mean,
no, they did not.
Yes,
they concluded that the missed shot was probably the first, but they couldn't determine the time. They said it was from 4.8 to in excess of 7 seconds, which includes 8 or 9 seconds. And we can't know if it's 8 seconds or 9 seconds. It's somewhere within that region. And the shot that missed could have been the last one. It could have been the one, it could have intersected the 2 that hit, although it's very doubtful because all the people that were right there said there was no shots between the 2 that hit. And I met some of those people and they were absolutely adamant about that. Now, it doesn't prove, but it supports substantially and with great weight that the shot that missed was not fired between the two that struck, and therefore you cannot determine, well, you cannot determine from the Zapruder film that 3 shots were fired within, 5 seconds or less than
That's
6.
it.
You cannot make that determination without a sound. You're wrong. What you said was misrepresent. Sure, it might represent what some people have told you, but they don't know. And the Zapruder film does not determine the spacing of the shots, other than the 2 that struck did so 5 seconds approximately apart.
Patrick, I have on a few occasions during this debate, if you'd like to call it that, presented testimony and statements from various witnesses that said they seen Oswald operating with a rifle. You haven't. You've not presented one person. You've presented what the Discovery Channel experiments have done. You can presented this, that, and the next thing, but you have not presented actual statements from people that seen Lee Oswald shoot a rifle. Now, I'm not here to debate the Zapruder film. There's other people that have done much more work on the Zapruder film than myself that would counter what you've said.
No, it wouldn't.
Yes, it would.
No, it would not.
Well,
there's no sound, Johnny. There's no sound, so it wouldn't counter what I've just said. What I stated was factually correct.
Patrick, please let me speak. Okay. Now, I think this debate, if you like, I think there's a piece of evidence that I would like to touch upon before we leave. A piece of evidence that I would like to touch upon before we leave this. And the piece of evidence I'd like to talk about is the paper bag, which was allegedly found around the 6th floor window after the assassination. Now, Patrick, could you please present me a picture of the bag around that 6th floor window?
No, there isn't one.
Why would that be?
Because a cop picked it up and moved it. Or there wasn't a picture taken. Johnny, you don't have to take a picture.
Patrick,
you don't need a picture. Let me finish. You don't need a picture in evidence.
It's a bonus. Patrick,
No, you don't. No, okay, you don't need a picture. I spoke to a judge 2 days ago.
I've spoke to many defense attorneys regarding this case, Patrick, and all of them in the United States. And I'm telling you, Patrick, are you trying to tell me that it's standard police procedure to remove evidence from a crime scene before official photographs have been taken of that crime scene? Yes or no?
No, but we don't know where the bag was found.
Removed. So why was the bag removed?
We don't know. It could have been on the other side of the boxes.
It could have been on the other side of the boxes. Okay. Have you studied the witness testimony regarding this bag?
Yes.
And they're all very contradictory. Now, if you look at the commission report, CE142 is a picture of some boxes on the 6th floor, and there is a dotted line on this drawing, and it is to simulate where the bag was found. Now, this, of course, has an evidentiary value of 0, but again, it's a massive problem, because why was the bag removed before any of the official crime scene photographs were taken? And if we look at the bag itself, okay, there was absolutely no evidence that this bag, which you present, that held a broken down Mannlicher Carcano rifle, actually held a broken down rifle. Now, Eisenberg, which was the attorney for the commission, was questioning Special Agent James Carrigan of the FBI. And this is what said of Mr. Eisenberg. Mr. Carrigan, did you notice when you looked at the bag whether there were, that is the bag found on the 6th floor, Exhibit 142, whether it had any bulges or unusual creases? Mr. Carrigan, I was also requested at that time to examine the bag to determine if there were any significant markings or scratches or abrasions or anything by which it could be associated with the rifle. Commission Exhibit 139, that is, could I find any markings that I could tie to that rifle? Eisenberg, yes. Carrigan, and I couldn't find any such markings. So there is no evidence that the bag you present ever held a broken down Mannlicher Carcano rifle. And in the words of Ian Griggs, if there is no gun sack, there is no gun.
We have very, very different views, Johnny, and I respect your views. I think you have a forensic understanding of some of the elements that we've talked about, which I admire tremendously. Some of the areas that we've talked about probably don't interest me as much as you, because I don't know how old you are, but I sort of came to the conclusion in the mid-90s, having been a conspiracy theorist for years, since the 80s, that I was wrong. And I started reading different books post 2000. There's been a whole bunch of really outstanding authors who've convinced me that Oswald was guilty, but I'll always remain open to a conspiracy. I just think it's far more likely that if there was one, Oswald was involved in it. And I have, despite all the stuff that you've detailed about the bag and the rifle, no, I suppose just a general comment. It's not just about the Warren Commission, is it? It's about other investigations, and regarding the shooting itself, I think we're in a better position than the Warren Commission were. And I'll tell you something, I think between we three, we probably know more about the JFK assassination than some of the Warren Commissioners did. So it's not the be all and end all. I accept totally that it's good to have an agenda, by the way, and to try and stick to it, but Oswald's guilt is about a lot of other things, in my opinion, that are needed to be discussed, around that particular day and his life as well. We're not talking about that today, but just to revisit that point that I made, he didn't need curtain rods, did he? Yet he took a package to work. Why did he? Why was he preparing Frazier for that package? I don't think he wanted him to be suspicious at all, did he? Anyway, so I don't know, where are we at? Are we going to regroup at some point?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we do this, Patrick? Johnny, why don't we agree to do this on another day, and maybe Patrick can be at a better spot, and then yeah. But I think it's I've tried to give you guys some sort of structure. Beforehand.
You've done well. All I'm saying is, I am actually, I think we really need to get more into it, because, geez, I've only touched upon like 3 of the points that I said we were going to talk about. So, but yeah, I think we need to, timing could be a bit of an issue for me. Obviously, I'm working full time during the week. I've got reviews to do of certain books. I've got a book edit to do as well. I'm so busy, and obviously Patrick might agree with me here for once that this case takes up a lot of your life. So you've got to kind of.
Are you in, Johnny? Are you in Edinburgh?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So you're quite a long way away, aren't you?
I like to debate it face to face. I could maybe do it one time. Obviously, when COVID's over, that would probably be more.
I'm due to go and, Mel Ayton, don't you, the author?
Oh yeah, I do. Yes.
Yeah, I wrote Beyond Reasonable Doubt and Questions of Controversy and Questions of Conspiracy. He's up in Durham, and I'm due to go and see him at some point. Who knows? We might be able to sort of meet up or something. That'd be good. I have to say that. You have an extremely forensic sort of approach to this, and I think you can make a case. You can raise doubt, as you have done, and I'm not going to dispute that there are issues with the case. But I would remind us all, that any murder like this, if it was scrutinised to the nth degree, like the JFK case has been, nobody would be convicted of anything, would they? It's just. Mistakes were made, I totally accept the bag should have been photographed, but the fact that it wasn't, it's just a mistake. The police make mistakes. I met quite a few of the DPD guys, back in the 80s. I met Patrick Dean. He was security that Sunday when Ruby was shot. When Ruby shot Oswald. Really good guy was Detective Gus Rose. He went out to Payne residence that Friday afternoon. He was a great guy, very polite. He took me down to the DPD and introduced me to a bunch of guys that had worked the case. I actually got the impression, just out of interest to you, that they'd really moved on from it. You know, it was just Tippit was more important to them than JFK, and you know they had cases to work on the following week, and I don't think a lot of them really gave it a huge amount of thought. That's the impression that I got. They were absolutely amazed that some young guy from Cambridge had come. Well, I'm not from Cambridge, but that's where I was studying. Come all the way over from Cambridge to do a master's degree. They thought that was hilarious.
I think, I mean, the Dallas police themselves, I mean, all one has to do is take a look at Jim Lavelle's comments regarding the president's killing, and I won't utter them because they're racist. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in the Dallas Police Department, and I don't have a lot of faith in the DA's office either. I mean, if you just take a look at the cases that have been getting reversed, I think it's over 30 murder cases now in Dallas.
I know. Yeah.
Some of these people have already been put to death. So
it's terrible.
I mean, I think there's a lot of this case. To me, I think the Dallas police did infringe upon, or sorry, not infringe. I would phrase that better. Probably grossly violate is probably the better word. Oswald's human and constitutional rights. I mean, the man was murdered while handcuffed to police officers while surrounded by them. I mean, the way he was transferred was a joke, and they're culpable for that man's murder. Now, whether you believe he was innocent or whether you believe he's guilty, Lee Oswald's murder on November 24th, 1963 is equally as tragic as the killing of the president, the killing of Officer Tippit. I mean, and it's the families of these men that are the ones that suffer. Oswald's children have had to live with the stigma of the assassination for many years, and they lost a father. J.D. Tippit's children and wife, they've had to live with the fact that their father was killed on November 22nd. And President Kennedy, his wife, his children, his brother, and the country were in mourning for a very long time, and still are, I would argue. So there is no winners here in this case. There is only losers. And
well, I think it was. Take your point about the Dallas police and their protection of Oswald. It was absolutely appalling, and they are culpable. Yeah. Are you, Johnny? Are you generally a sort of a pro-conspiracy guy? I mean, do you suspect conspiracy in the Robert Kennedy case and Martin Luther King, for example?
I don't. When you say conspiracy guy, I don't wear a tin hat and think the aliens are invading us. And that's why I don't want to discuss speculation. I don't engage in speculation in this case, whether it is from a pro-conspiracy standpoint or Oswald or a lone person killed President Kennedy. I think this case has far too much speculation. Hence why I just like to concentrate on the facts and the evidence. And I think a lot of people are caught up in the theories and the different theories that don't look at the evidence of the case. But no, I would say one thing. I would say that to believe that Oswald is innocent of this crime does not make me a conspiracy theorist. I mean, a lot of defense attorneys believe that their clients are innocent of the crime of the charges that they face, and they defend these people. And I believe that that's all I'm doing. I'm defending Lee Oswald, and I think he has never been given any kind of defense, whether that's before the Warren Commission, before the HSCA. He's never been given a defense. He's never had someone there calling witnesses, cross-examining witnesses, challenging the evidence and presenting exculpatory evidence. And that's just a fact. I mean, I know, what do you call his name? The commission.
Spence.
No, that's London Weekend Television. I know Mark Lane wanted to represent Lee Oswald before the commission, and he was denied.
Yeah.
And I just think that the man's rights have been grossly violated. And remember, Oswald, in fact, I actually wanted to I actually wanted to start my presentation off with one of his quotes, and it always hits a nerve with me, this quote. And he says, "I don't know what dispatches you people have been given, but I emphatically deny these charges." And you can think what you want about this case, that to me, for some reason, has always struck a chord with me. Because obviously, if you plan to kill the president, you're doing it because you're a so-called communist, etc., etc. Why wouldn't you just admit it? Like Mark Chapman, for example, who killed John Lennon, he stood there at the side reading Catcher in the Rye, and he said he was guilty. I've actually just finished reading a book on the Robert Kennedy case. Don't know too much about the Robert Kennedy. Well, I know a little bit more now, but
Yeah.
I don't know as much. And as I said to a group of friends there yesterday, the one case is enough to take up all your time. And I find that this case does take up a lot of your time, but it's an honourable cause, and I'll keep going with it.
Takes up a lot of my time. You know, I'm a work in the IT software business. I'm a logistics consultant, and quite a lot of my customers have pulled out of projects, so I've had quite a lot of spare time. But you can certainly get dragged into it rather a lot. And sometimes I say to myself, you know, why do you bother? And the answer is, I've met some great people, but the main reason I've been trawling the internet, particularly, it used to be Amazon discussions and book reviews. You can't even comment on a book review now on Amazon. Was to do research for my own book, and I've been working on it for about 10 years. It started off based on my thesis, which was an appraisal of the pro-conspiracy literature up to about 1983. I reviewed about 100 books, and I concluded that there was a case to be made for conspiracy, and some authors had made quite a good case out of it, actually. But I started to expand on the idea. A colleague of mine who's a BBC producer is very interested in how the internet itself shapes and forms people's views and self-informs, and of course the technology aids the speed that we can communicate and the number of people that you can reach out to. To me, that's almost become as interesting as the actual assassination, if that makes sense. You know, the fact that we all get together on this in the ether, in this virtual world, and debate a nearly 60-year-old murder is quite fascinating in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. I remember I went to Dallas in 2018, and people were looking at me quite strangely, because they were like, why have you traveled all the way over here? Because I think I had to fly from Edinburgh to London to Dallas, and I think my flight overall was like 11 hours. And in economy, it's not recommended.
No.
I done it, and people were like, wow, you've traveled all the way over here for this? Why are you interested in this? This is an American crime. And it's not an American crime. This is a worldwide crime. And the death of President Kennedy affected a lot of people, and affected history itself. And I think that we still don't know what happened in Dallas. Some people will say they do, but if you're really being honest, people don't know what happened. And I think we owe it to President Kennedy, and we owe it to I
mean, I don't want to start another sort of discussion on those lines, but you see, I mean, I take a totally different view. I think we do know what happened. Don't know whether Oswald assembled the rifle on the 7th floor. He probably did, or the 6th floor. We don't know how come he only had 4 bullets. It's quite interesting, but you know, yeah. I think that we do know what happened, and I think let me very quickly say, I think the reason, although you've made some very good points, very strongly, and respect, I think the main reason why it's still lingering in a powerful way is because a cottage industry was generated, and it became much more than a cottage industry, and it's fueled by myth and fable and wish fulfillment. And if I could just let you know, I worked for the BBC on a couple of documentaries. I checked text and facts, but I also worked as a junior research assistant on The Men Who Killed Kennedy with Nigel Turner, because my tutor at Cambridge put me into, he knew someone in Central TV, and he said, I've got an ex-postgraduate guy who did a lot of work on the JFK case. Do you need a researcher? And so I went for an interview at Central in Birmingham, and got a job, and I tell you what that taught me. None of the people who made that documentary, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, believed half of what they put on the television. Nigel Turner wasn't interested in historical truth. I heard him say that. He was interested in making good television and making money. And all those stuff that he put on, you know, it's so seductively presented, and they didn't believe it. The two main assistants to him didn't believe in Badgeman, didn't believe in the Grassy Knoll gunman, didn't believe in the Corsican Mafia connection, didn't believe Ed Hoffman saw a rifleman, didn't believe Beverly Oliver was there, and didn't believe Gordon Arnold, who said he was at the top of the steps. And that opened my mind. It was one of the main reasons I thought, hang on a sec, Patrick, you've been duped. Mark Lane went to his grave knowing Oswald could have been the assassin. In fact, he said, never said Oswald was not guilty, didn't he? So I think you've got to be very careful in the way that you think. And I think although you have a detailed forensic appreciation of the case, Johnny, that you've probably been influenced. If you could speak to Frank Badelson, the law enforcement officer in Virginia who worked with some of the Secret Service guys on the Kennedy detail, who really knows his stuff, I think he'd be able to give you a real go for your money, so to speak. And so would Barry Ryder in London, 35 years in Crown Prosecution Service. Those two guys know the forensics of this case, the kind of thing that interests you more than me. You really have your work cut out for you with those two guys. But I don't think they wouldn't take part in a debate on the radio.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but what I do know is this murder case, and I've spoke to many defence attorneys from across in the United States, and I've spoke to them at length, and I've asked them what their views are of the evidence, and they've told me this case is, in a legal sense, is a non-starter.
It's a what?
A non-starter, basically. I mean, I remember there's a video on YouTube, and it's Joe Tonahill, and he was counsel for Jack Ruby. And
oh yeah, I remember that.
And he said that there was no way, and in fact, I'll send a link to Bill. Says that Oswald would not have been found guilty. It was a weak circumstantial evidence case, and he actually thinks that the judge presiding over the Oswald trial would have actually had to been forced to instruct the jury to return a verdict of not guilty based on insufficient evidence. And I mean, I think the thing that we forget as well is the most important witness in this whole case is Lee Oswald.
Sure.
The man's dead. So Oswald, we don't know how it would have played out, but surely a living, breathing Lee Oswald up there testifying as to where he was, what he was doing. In fact, if there would have been, obviously, the whole Hugh Wesley Fraser and the curtain rod story, that might have been completely challenged. Of course, we know by looking at the testimony of Jack Doughty that he seen Oswald enter the building that morning. He claimed to see nothing in Oswald's hands. So that anywhere you turn in this case, there's challenge. And I mean, I'm actually reading Hugh Fraser's book at the moment. I don't know if anyone else has, but I'm reading it. I actually spoke to Hugh Fraser about 3 weeks ago. Yeah, I spoke to him. And I asked him two questions. I asked him, Mr. Fraser, on November 21st, 1963, did you see Lee Oswald approach your car, or any time during the ride or when he walked away from your car? Did you see any paper bag? Did you see any materials to make such a bag? And he said, no, he did not. So this is what I mean. And this is an important part of this case, because the commission claimed that...
Get a piece of brown paper, cut it 38 inches long, fold it into 19 inches, fold it into 9.5 inches, put it inside your jacket.
But then you've got to think about it. Why would they go to such lengths to conceal something like that, but leaves behind incriminating evidence like backyard photographs? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Of course, the other thing that I ran out of time was I wanted to talk
about the backyard. Don't forget the backyard photographs were taken in April, weren't they? I hadn't even thought about killing Kennedy then.
Well, yeah, but they were still allegedly in Ruth Payne's garage. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was Troy West. Of course, Mr. West's testimony before the commission, he makes it as clear as day that Lee Oswald was never observed around his workstation. He never seen Oswald make a rifle, and he never, a paper bag, and he never seen Oswald take paper out of the machine to make the bag later. Now, why is this significant? Why is this significant? Because Mr. West was maybe a bit, not OCD, but he never left his workstation. He even lunched at his workstation. So he never left it. And he
I think that's a very weak set of statements that you've just made for starters. Let me finish.
This is basically
why would Oswald want to make a paper bag in the 3 or 4 weeks before, if he only decided to have a pot shot at Kennedy that week? He wouldn't have any reason to make a paper bag. And Mr. West was not, or he was a coffee. He had coffee duties. He went to the bathroom. But Oswald could have gone into work early on the Thursday morning, or stayed late on the Wednesday evening and made that bag.
But it's all speculation. I mean, of course, it's all speculation.
Well, and so is yours, speculation.
Patrick Collins, Johnny Cairns, thank you for participating in the Quorum Radio JFK debate.